In the farthest corner of the city's bustling and overburdened animal shelter, there was one kennel that seemed to hold a different kind of silence, a silence born not from peace, but fear. Tucked beneath a flickering overhead light, behind, bars plastered with warning signs, sat a dog whose presence sent shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned handlers. Blaze. A name that once might have evoked images of strength or fire, but now spoke only of danger. He was a massive German shepherd, his coat rugged and unkempt, his gaze intense and unyielding. His eyes, cold and piercing, followed every movement with suspicion, and when anyone drew near, his lips curled back in a warning growl that echoed off the shelter walls like distant thunder. The staff had learned quickly that Blaze was no ordinary rescue. He was volatile, unpredictable, and had been deeply broken by something or someone long before he arrived. Volunteers avoided his cage like it carried a plague. The word had spread quickly among them, traveling faster than fact. They spoke of him in hushed tones, some swearing they'd seen him lunge with terrifying precision, others claiming he could sense fear before it was even felt. A bright red sign on the bars screamed, "Danger, do not approach," and below it, a scratched-up clipboard recorded failed attempts at interaction. Behavioral specialists had come and gone, some with bloody sleeves, others simply shaking their heads in defeat. Treats were ignored, toys were shredded in fury, and kind voices were met with bared teeth. Blaze had become a ghost within those metal walls, present but unreachable. He wasn't a dog waiting to be adopted. He was a cautionary tale that everyone had stopped telling because no one believed in a happy ending anymore. Among the staff, no one understood Blaze's pain quite like Mrs. Harris. She had been volunteering at the shelter for over 30 years and had seen more than her fair share of wounded animals, both physically and emotionally. Still, even she admitted Blaze was different. "Someone did a number on that boy," she murmured one evening as she locked up his cage for the night. Her voice trembled with a mix of empathy and resignation. Blaze didn't even glance at her. He just lay in the corner, licking the spot where an old wound throbbed from time to time. A limp in his hind leg told the story of a poorly healed injury. Scars marred his fur like a tragic road map of the life he'd survived. Small burns, bald patches, hardened skin. His body bore the memories of cruelty, and his eyes reflected the soul that hadn't healed from it. Despite all efforts, Blaze remained an enigma wrapped in aggression. The shelter had reached out to local rescue groups hoping someone might take him on, but no one wanted to risk it. It was whispered, even among leadership, that Blaze's days might be numbered. No adoptive family would take a dog they couldn't approach. No trainer had made a breakthrough, and time was a cruel thing in a crowded shelter. Yet every day they gave him food, cleaned his cage, and hoped, quietly, that something, anything, might change. But it never did. Blaze remained in the shadows of that cage like a soldier stuck in a war only he could see. He snarled at hope and snapped at love. He had become, in their minds, unreachable. Then came the rain. It was a gray Tuesday, heavy with clouds and the scent of soaked asphalt. Most of the shelter was quiet, save for a few barking dogs protesting their confinement. Visitors were rare on stormy days, and the workers used the lull to catch up on chores. That's when the door creaked open, and in stepped a little girl, with soaked shoes and a firm grip on her father's hand. Her name was Emma, and she was no older than 7. Her raincoat hung loosely on her small frame, and her backpack had a hand-stitched heart sewn into the corner. She wasn't there for a cute puppy or a happy bundle of fur. She didn't run toward the tail-wagging Labradors or squeal at the playful beagle in the first kennel. Instead, she walked quietly, curiously, eyes scanning the cages with a kind of thoughtful sadness that seemed far too deep for someone her age. As they made their way down the row, Emma came to an abrupt stop. Her eyes had locked onto Blaze. Her father, clearly uneasy, tried to guide her past. "Not that one, honey," he said, voice tight with concern. "He's not safe." But Emma stood firm. Her eyes, wide and curious, met Blaze's through the metal bars. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Blaze didn't growl. He didn't snap. He just looked back, his body rigid but his face uncertain. It was a moment that slipped quietly through the noise of the shelter, almost unnoticed. Almost. Emma slowly knelt in front of his cage, ignoring her father's whisper of warning. She didn't speak. She didn't reach out. She just placed her tiny palm flat against the cold metal, her fingertips barely touching the bars. Blaze stared at her hand, his head low, ears slightly perked. The staff held their breath, expecting a snarl, but none came. The air in the room shifted. It was as though, just for a heartbeat, two souls saw something in each other. Two beings, each quietly broken by a world that hadn't been kind. And in that moment, they didn't need words. They only needed silence. From across the room, Mrs. Harris watched with wide eyes. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Blaze, the untouchable, the monster of the shelter, was calm. Tentative, yes, but calm. "That's never happened," she whispered to herself. Other staff peeked from doorways and behind counters, their curiosity mixing with disbelief. But Emma remained where she was, unmoved by the weight of so many stares. Her gaze never wavered. Neither did Blaze's. After a few minutes, Emma stood and turned to her father. "Can we come back tomorrow?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with something unshakable. Determination. Her father hesitated, looked at the staff, then back at Blaze, who still hadn't moved. Finally, he nodded, and just like that, something had shifted. Not just in Blaze, but in the air around his cage and the hearts of the people who had almost given up on him. He was still dangerous, still unpredictable, but maybe, just maybe, not entirely unreachable. And that was how the healing began. Not with commands or treats or professional training, but with the quiet presence of a little girl who saw beyond the growl, beyond the scars, and into the hurt beneath it all. The next day came with clear skies, the rain having washed away the grime from the streets and left behind the faint smell of damp earth. At the shelter, the workers moved through their routines, not expecting anything unusual, until the bell over the front door jingled once more. Emma, in a yellow dress and pink sneakers, walked in holding her father's hand, just like the day before. But this time, she didn't pause to look around or admire any of the other animals. Her small feet carried her straight toward Blaze's cage, like a compass drawn to true north. The staff, who had only yesterday been frozen in disbelief at the sight of Blaze's stillness, now watched with quiet hope. Emma didn't ask for permission. She walked directly to his cage and sat on the floor in front of it, legs crossed, hands resting gently on her lap. Blaze was already awake. As soon as she entered the room, he lifted his head from where it rested on his paws. No growl, no lunge, just the twitch of one ear and a slow blink, like a silent acknowledgement. His posture was still tense, but his eyes were different. They didn't carry the same storm they once had. There was something quieter behind them now. Curious. Cautious. A flicker of something that looked an awful lot like recognition. Her father hovered a few feet away, arms crossed tightly. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" he asked. Emma nodded without looking back. "I'm sure, Daddy." And that was that. She began to speak in a low, steady voice, not to the adults, not even to herself, but to Blaze. She told him about her day at school, about the girl in her class who traded her a cookie for a pencil, and how she didn't like math but loved stories. Every word flowed gently, like ripples across still water. Blaze didn't respond, of course, but he didn't retreat to the back of his cage either. He simply lay there, head up, ears angled forward, listening. Day after day, the same scene repeated itself. Emma would arrive at the shelter, sometimes with her dad, other times with her mom. No matter the weather or how tired she felt, she insisted on going. She never brought toys or tried to force anything on Blaze. Instead, she brought books. Picture books at first, then early readers, and as the days passed, slightly longer stories. She would sit beside his cage and read aloud, her voice soft and melodic. Occasionally she would pause and look up, making sure Blaze was still watching, and he always was. The staff, once skeptical and even fearful of what might happen, began to grow comfortable with the routine. They pulled a small folding chair over for Emma to sit on, and someone even placed a tiny rug under it to keep her legs from getting cold on the concrete. Blaze's demeanor shifted so gradually that it was almost imperceptible. At first, he would only sit quietly, unmoving, but soon his ears would perk when Emma's voice filled the room. Then his head would rise when he heard her footsteps entering the shelter. A week later, he started to stand up and move to the front of his kennel when she arrived. His tail, once stiff and unmoving, began to flick slightly, barely noticeable, but it was there. Still, there were boundaries. The staff warned Emma not to put her fingers through the bars, not to try to pet him, not to offer food, and Emma obeyed. She didn't push. She understood, somehow, instinctively, that Blaze wasn't ready. That trust had to be earned slowly. And so, she kept talking. She talked about her little brother who always ate her cereal, about how she was scared of thunderstorms and how her favorite thing in the world was making people feel better when they were sad. One day she said, "I think you're just sad, too, Blaze. Like me sometimes." Blaze didn't flinch. He didn't growl. He just looked at her, long and hard, like he was hearing not just her words, but the truth behind them. Then came the moment no one expected. It was a quiet afternoon. Only a few staff members were on duty, and the shelter's usual chaos had lulled into a rare stillness. Emma was sitting on her rug reading a book about a dog who got lost in a big city, but found his way home through kindness and courage. Her stuffed rabbit, the one she carried everywhere, was perched in her lap. As she read, the toy slipped from her fingers and tumbled forward, rolling right up to the bars of Blaze's cage. Everyone froze. Emma didn't reach for it. She stayed perfectly still, her eyes wide but calm. Blaze lowered his head, slowly creeping toward the stuffed rabbit. His muscles were tight, his nose twitching. The room was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. And then, as gently as a whisper, Blaze extended his snout and sniffed the toy. He didn't snarl. He didn't shred it. He just looked at it, then back at Emma. She smiled. That moment was small, but for Blaze, it was a monumental shift. The staff exchanged glances, none daring to speak. Even Mrs. Harris, who had seen thousands of dogs over her decades at the shelter, found her eyes misting over. "That dog is starting to come back," she whispered to herself, hand over her heart. The next day, Emma arrived with something new, a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax. Paper. She sat down, unwrapped it slowly, took a small bite, then gently tore off a piece and laid it on the floor just outside the bars. She didn't push it in. She didn't coerce. She simply offered it, and waited. Blaze stayed back at first. His eyes flicked between her face and the food. He sniffed the air. His tail swished faintly behind him. Then, inch by inch, he approached. Each step was deliberate, like his body was battling itself between fear and curiosity. When he finally reached the food, he paused, then cautiously licked it into his mouth. He chewed slowly, eyes never leaving Emma's. She didn't cheer or clap. She just smiled, warm and patient. Then she tore off another piece and offered it, this time resting it gently inside the bars. The second bite took longer. Blaze's paws edged forward, his nose quivering. With one final breath, he leaned in and took the food directly from her hand. Gasps broke the silence. One of the handlers turned away, wiping a tear before anyone could see. The shelter director, who had already scheduled Blaze for a behavioral reevaluation that might have ended his stay, quietly folded that paperwork and tucked it in a drawer, hoping it would never be needed. Emma, blissfully unaware of how close Blaze had come to being forgotten, just sat there, offering her kindness one crumb at a time. From that single bite of sandwich, everything began to change. Not overnight, not all at once, but slowly. like the gentle thawing of ice after a long and bitter winter. Blaze, once the snarling shadow in the corner of the shelter, now rose, to his feet every afternoon at the same time, as though his soul had memorized the rhythm of Emma's footsteps. The staff didn't need to check the clock to know it was nearly 4 p.m. Blaze would be standing at the front of his kennel, tail wagging with a hesitant sway, ears tilted in anticipation. Emma became more than a visitor. She became a ritual, and Blaze, for all his fear and fury, was beginning to trust in that ritual. The next step forward came almost by accident. Emma arrived one Thursday afternoon clutching her well-loved copy of a book about a brave dog named Shadow who saved his family from a forest fire. She sat cross-legged in front of Blaze's cage and began to read. Blaze, as usual, watched intently. But that day, her voice wavered. Mid-sentence, she lowered the book and looked at Blaze with soft, glassy eyes. "Sometimes," she said in a whisper, "I feel like I don't fit in either." She didn't explain further, but she didn't have to. Blaze, whose entire life had been defined by pain, didn't need words to understand. He stood up and moved closer to the bars, his breath fogging the space between them. He sat down, head slightly tilted, as if waiting for her to continue. Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out the same stuffed rabbit Blaze had sniffed days earlier. She placed it gently just inside the kennel door, far enough for Blaze to reach, but not too close to be threatening. Then she backed away, returned to her spot, and said nothing more. At first, Blaze didn't react. He eyed the rabbit like it was a test, but then, in one long, slow movement, he stretched forward and dragged it toward him with his paw. He laid, beside it, head resting on the floor, eyes watching Emma as she resumed reading. He didn't bite it, didn't destroy it. He simply rested with it. It was the first toy Blaze had accepted, maybe in his entire life. The staff took note. They updated his file that evening. Dog showed signs of toy engagement, no aggression displayed. It was a small sentence, but it meant everything. By the end of the second week, Emma no longer needed to stay behind the line they'd once drawn in chalk on the floor. With staff approval, she was allowed to move closer, just a little. Now she sat within a few feet of the cage, close enough that Blaze could hear every word of her books without the echo of distance between them. They began to share snacks, carefully supervised, of course. Emma would gently toss a piece of apple or carrot through the bars, and Blaze would catch it midair, like a pup rediscovering play. But it was the following Saturday that marked the beginning of something deeper. Emma arrived early, bundled in a light jacket despite the rising spring sun. In her hands, she carried a red rubber ball. She approached Blaze's cage with her usual calm, sat down, and without a word, rolled the ball slowly across the floor. It stopped just short of the cage. Blaze's eyes followed it. He didn't move. She waited. 10 seconds, then 20. The staff, watching from a distance, remained silent, not daring to breathe too loudly. Finally, Blaze stepped forward, nosed the ball, and gave it a gentle tap with his paw. It rolled back to Emma. She clapped softly, not wanting to startle him. "Good boy, Blaze," she whispered, and then she did it again. Rolled it forward, waited. This time, Blaze pushed it back faster, and then again, and again. They played like that for nearly 20 minutes, a quiet, clumsy rhythm of trust and motion. A dog who once tore into chain-link fences was now playing a game of fetch, sort of, with a 7-year-old girl whose laughter echoed through the halls like a lullaby. The transformation was undeniable, but still, Blaze remained inside the cage. The real test, the terrifying, uncertain step, would be to let him out even just for a moment. It had never been done before, not safely. No handler had ever walked him without incident. But Emma had done what no adult could. She had reached him, touched a part of him that had remained locked away. So the shelter staff made a plan, carefully, methodically. It started with Blaze getting used to a new leash. They brought it into the room, left it near his kennel, let him sniff it through the bars. No pressure, no commands, just presence. Then they let Emma hold it, only from a distance, so Blaze could associate her with it. Each day they moved it a little closer, until one morning the shelter manager asked Emma a quiet question. "Would you like to meet Blaze, outside of the cage?" Emma's eyes widened with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Can I really?" "If he's ready," the manager replied, "and only if you're comfortable." Her father, always nearby, knelt beside her. "You don't have to, sweetie, only if you want to." Emma nodded slowly. "I want to. I think he's ready." The next afternoon, the staff prepped the secure outdoor play yard, a fully fenced space with only one entry point, monitored by multiple handlers. Blaze's kennel door was opened for the first time in weeks. A trained behaviorist stood by, leash in hand, using calm cues. No sudden moves. Blaze hesitated, sniffed the air, turned back toward his cage, then forward again. Emma stood near the gate, hands folded behind her back, her body still and steady. Blaze stepped forward. No growl, no lunge, just one paw, then another, and then he was outside. Emma sat on a small bench inside the yard, watching as Blaze explored the space slowly. He sniffed the grass, looked up at the clouds, then over to her. At first, he kept his distance, circling the edges of the yard, like a soldier, surveying unknown territory. Then something extraordinary happened. Blaze walked, no, trotted toward her. Not fast, not recklessly, but with intent. When he reached her, he paused, then lowered his massive head gently into her lap. Emma froze, her eyes wide, mouth slightly open, and then, with trembling fingers, she reached out and stroked his fur. "Hi, Blaze," she whispered. "You're okay now." He closed his eyes. In that moment, surrounded by safety and sun, the girl and the dog, two souls marked by their own versions of pain, finally met each other completely. Not through bars, not across cold concrete, but face to face, heart to heart. Inside the shelter, the staff wept. The first time Blaze laid his head in Emma's lap marked the beginning of his rebirth. That single gesture, so simple, so profound, unlocked something in both of them. The tough shell Blaze had worn like armor for so long was now cracked, and from it began to emerge a creature no one had truly seen before. He wasn't just the aggressive dog behind the cage anymore. He was becoming someone's friend, someone's protector, someone's family. The outdoor meetings became routine. Each day after school, Emma would head straight to the shelter and, if the weather allowed, she and Blaze would meet in the secure yard. At first, the sessions were brief and carefully supervised, with a handler always close by. But as Blaze's behavior improved, his body language more relaxed, his responses more measured, the handlers gradually gave them more space. Blaze began to associate these moments with safety, with Emma, with joy. The change in him was impossible to ignore. His walk was different. Where he once slinked with wary, low movements, now he trotted with his tail up and ears perked. His eyes, once hard and cold, held a gleam of curiosity. The staff at the shelter, most of whom had once braced themselves whenever they walked by his cage, now paused just to watch him interact with Emma, their expressions filled with awe and disbelief. One afternoon, as Emma arrived with a small tote, bag swinging from her shoulder, she had something new for Blaze, a rope toy. She held it up with a hopeful smile, knelt on the grass, and called softly, "Blaze, want to play?" He approached, sniffed it cautiously, and after a brief pause, grabbed one end in his mouth. Emma giggled and tugged the other side. A playful growl rumbled in Blaze's chest. Not a warning, but a teasing sound, the kind dogs make when they're finally having fun. They played like that until both were tired. Emma collapsed in laughter, and Blaze flopped onto the grass beside her, panting and content. From the office window, Mrs. Harris, the veteran volunteer who had once declared Blaze broken, wiped her eyes. "That girl," she whispered to herself, "she's his miracle." It wasn't just the staff who noticed. Emma's parents did too. They began to spend more time at the shelter, watching their daughter from benches, their hearts swelling. at the way Blaze followed Emma with such gentle loyalty. There was no more growling, no more lunging, only trust. When Emma knelt, Blaze followed. When she called, he came. One evening, Emma's father pulled the shelter director aside. "What would it take," he asked, "for us to bring Blaze home?" The question lingered like a prayer. The director hesitated. Blaze had come a long way, but adoption was no small step, especially for a dog with such a troubled past. She laid out the requirements: home visits, evaluations, ongoing training, safety assessments. It wouldn't be easy. But the look in the father's eyes and the unwavering hope in Emma's made something inside her say yes. The process began with a home check. Shelter staff visited Emma's house the following weekend. It was modest, a cozy 2-bedroom home with a fenced backyard and plenty of space. Blaze would have a soft bed by the fireplace, toys already waiting in a basket, and a spot beside Emma's bed where he could sleep at night. The backyard was secure, the neighborhood quiet, the environment peaceful. Everything checked out. Next came supervised visits to the home itself. The first time Blaze stepped inside Emma's house, he was hesitant. His paws clicked against the hardwood floor, his nose twitching as he explored each room. Emma led him around slowly, showing him everything: her bookshelf, her drawing table, the basket of dog toys she had carefully arranged in the corner. Blaze sniffed everything cautiously, then circled back to Emma and sat beside her, pressing his head against her hand. "He's claiming his space," one of the staff members whispered to Emma's mom. And that's exactly what it was. Blaze was no longer a visitor. He was starting to feel like he belonged. But the most touching moment of that day came unexpectedly. As Emma was showing Blaze her favorite picture book, she paused to tie her shoelace. In that moment, Blaze walked over to her toy basket, gently, picked up the same stuffed rabbit she had given him weeks ago at the shelter. The staff had brought it along without telling Emma, and carried it to her feet. He set it down carefully, then lay beside it. Emma looked up, eyes wide with surprise, and then tears. "He remembered," she whispered. After a few more visits and evaluations, the day they had all been waiting for finally arrived. The adoption papers were signed. The staff gathered in the lobby to say goodbye. There were hugs, cheers, and more than a few tears. Mrs. Harris brought out a homemade good boy bandana, gently tying it around Blaze's neck. The once feared dog, now wagging his tail freely, looked up at her with calm, grateful eyes. She bent down and kissed the top of his head. "You made it, old boy. You really made it." Blaze walked out of the shelter that day, not in a cage, not on high alert, but beside the little girl who had saved him. Emma held the leash in one hand and her father's hand in the other. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow on the sidewalk as they made their way to the car. Blaze didn't resist. He jumped into the back seat, turned in a circle, and lay down with a heavy sigh of contentment. At home, Emma gave him a grand tour once more, this time as his house. She showed him where his water bowl would be, his bed, and even the small drawer where she kept treats. Blaze followed her from room to room like a shadow, never more than a few steps behind. When bedtime came, Emma brushed her teeth quickly, jumped into her pajamas and called softly, "Come here, Blaze." He padded into her room and curled up beside her bed. She leaned over, resting her head near his, and whispered, "You're safe now. Forever." Blaze closed his eyes. The dog who had once been abandoned, feared, and forgotten was now surrounded by love. He had a family, a warm bed, a girl who believed in him more than anyone else ever had. And in the quiet of that first night at home, as the house settled into silence, Blaze let out a content sigh and finally, truly, slept in peace. Blaze's first few days at his new home were a mixture of curiosity, cautiousness, and deep, quiet healing. He stayed close to Emma, always watching her, always waiting to see what she needed from him. The once volatile dog had become a silent guardian. It wasn't that his fears had vanished overnight. Sometimes sudden noises still made him flinch and strangers still caused his body to stiffen, but the difference was, he no longer faced those fears alone. He had Emma. Emma's parents worked hard to make Blaze feel like he belonged. Her mother prepared fresh food just for him, boiled chicken and rice on his first night home, carefully portioned into a ceramic bowl with his name on it. Her father installed a second lock on the backyard gate, just in case. They moved their old armchair next to Emma's bed because Blaze seemed to like curling up in that exact corner. Every detail in the house began to shift slightly, adjusting around him. He wasn't a visitor anymore. He was part of the family. Emma's morning routine changed too. Instead of rushing through breakfast, she made time to sit beside Blaze, sometimes resting her head on his back while eating toast. She talked to him about school, about her drawings, about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. He would listen, head tilted, as if he understood every word. And maybe in his own way he did. The neighbors were surprised the first time they saw Emma walking Blaze around the block. A few of them stopped mid-step, unsure of how to react to the large German shepherd once labeled as dangerous. But Blaze walked calmly beside her, his leash loose, his ears relaxed, his stride confident but peaceful. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just kept his eyes on Emma and followed her lead. A week later, Emma brought Blaze to a local dog park for the first time. Her parents were cautious, speaking to the park's manager beforehand, explaining Blaze's history and asking for a quiet time slot. The manager nodded understandingly and cleared a half-hour window. Emma and Blaze arrived early in the morning when the air was cool and the grass still damp with dew. At first, Blaze didn't move. He sat at the gate, observing the wide-open space. His ears twitched at the chirp of birds, his eyes followed leaves tumbling in the breeze. Emma unclipped the leash and took a few steps forward, then turned back and called gently, "Come on, Blaze. It's okay." For a long moment, he just stood there. And then, slowly, hesitantly, he took a few steps, then a few more. Then suddenly, he broke into a run. It was the first time Emma had ever seen him truly run. His legs stretched out, tail flying behind. Blaze sprinted across the field like he was shaking off years of chains and cages. Emma clapped her hands and laughed, the sound echoing through the quiet morning. He ran a full circle, then came charging back to her, tongue lolling out, eyes bright with joy. That day, Blaze wasn't a rescue. He wasn't a broken dog. He was simply free. Later that week, the shelter invited Emma and her family back for a small event, celebrating successful adoptions. They wanted to honor Blaze's transformation and the role Emma played in it. At first, Emma felt shy about standing on a stage, but when she saw Blaze sitting at her feet with his calm, proud posture, she found her voice. She told the audience about the first time she saw Blaze, about the silence that passed between them, and about how sometimes the ones who seem scariest are just the ones who've been hurt the most. She didn't use big words. She didn't need to. Her honesty carried more weight than anything else could. People cried, people clapped. Even some of the toughest volunteers wiped their eyes. Blaze received a small medal that day, a simple silver tag engraved with the word, "Brave." Emma looped it onto his collar, hugging him tightly. "You earned this," she whispered. "You're the bravest dog I know." Back at home, Blaze settled into a beautiful rhythm. He followed Emma from room to room, always close but never overbearing. He lay beneath her desk while she did homework, occasionally resting his head on her foot. When she practiced reading aloud, he listened. When she had bad dreams and cried out in the middle of the night, he would nudge open her door and climb up beside her bed, curling protectively around her. Emma wasn't the only one who changed. Blaze changed Emma too. Her teachers noticed she was more confident in class. She volunteered to read out loud. She raised her hand more often. She drew pictures of dogs and wrote stories about rescue animals. Her parents noticed she was calmer, more focused, more empathetic. Blaze had taught her patience, compassion, and the quiet strength that comes from loving someone who needs you most. As the months passed, the scars on Blaze's body faded, but the one on his soul, the deep, invisible one, healed even more beautifully. He stopped reacting to loud noises. He began greeting guests with cautious curiosity instead of fear. He learned tricks: sit, stay, shake, and even earned a most improved ribbon at a local obedience class. But none of those achievements mattered as much as what he already was: a loved dog in a loving home. One autumn afternoon, Emma sat beneath a tree in their backyard, her sketchbook on her lap. Blaze lay beside her, his head resting on her thigh. She was drawing him again, capturing the softness in his eyes, the strength in his posture. At the top of the page she wrote, "Not broken, just waiting to be loved." That night, Emma placed the drawing in a frame and set it on her nightstand. As she climbed into bed, Blaze jumped into his usual spot by the armchair. He let out a content sigh, closing his eyes. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered, into the dark. "Not ever again." And he wasn't. Blaze had gone from being the most feared dog in the shelter to the heart of a home. All because one little girl saw beyond his growls, beyond his silence, beyond his scars. She saw a soul worth saving, and in doing so, she saved herself too.